I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing our next presenter, Mr. Janus Norman. Janus Norman is the California Medical Association's Senior Vice President and Chief Lobbyist, where he manages CMA's state and federal government relations work and oversees the political operations for the organization. Prior to joining the CMA, he served as a legislative advocate for the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, the largest public sector union, where he was responsible for developing the legislative agenda for the organization and supervising day-to-day lobbying operations. He previously worked for the Judicial Council of California, the Assembly Budget Committee, and the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and was awarded a prestigious Jesse Unruh Assembly Fellowship. He is a graduate of California State University, Sacramento. Welcome, Mr. Janus Norman.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. As previously stated, my name is Janus Norman. I have the pleasure of being Chief Lobbyist for the California Medical Association. Just a little bit about the association. We have the pleasure of representing over 50,000 physician members and med students in our organization. I should not have you seeing my boring whiteboard, so forgive me for that. Physician members and med students, we represent, again, the practice of medicine, the profession of medicine, in all modes of practice and all specialties. We are one of the largest, we're the first or second, depending on how Texas is fudging the numbers, either the first or the second largest state medical association in the nation. And have been labeled one of the most effective lobbying organizations in the state as well. So really just appreciate the opportunity to present and talk and chat. When I'm sharing my screen, I really can't see you. So please feel free to jump in. I love it when people ask questions. Literally just jump in and ask questions. I will do my best to monitor the chat. But I think it's best when this is sort of interactive. We are going to do an activity as well. But the real goal is to give you a flavor for what does it mean to lobby? What is a lobbying organization sort of structured like? How do from an organized medicine standpoint, how do we organize ourselves in lobby, points of entry to have influence within the legislative process, recognizing what motivates a legislator, because again, it is a political process, and recognizing the fact that it is a political process means there are political motivations. And then I really wanted to leave you with the skill of an elevator pitch, or starting to think about an elevator pitch. Oftentimes, when you meet people of influence, you're only going to have moments to make sort of that first impression and get your message across. And I wanted to sort of leave you with and have you practice sort of that skill. And that's what we're going to do for the duration of my presentation. And again, I just want to make sure that it's as interactive as possible. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep. I don't know if you meant to be on like actual presentation mode. We can see your slides though, fine.
You can see my slides and remove the presentation mode. Let's get started. So what does a government relations sort of structure look like? There are different elements to a lobbying entity, a lobbying effort, a lobbying enterprise. Org charts may look different, but it's really always sort of two sides of the house. At the top, you see myself as the senior vice president, but you see a couple of titles. So legislative advocates are typically your lobbyists. Your lobbyists are the individuals that are literally their jobs are on a day-to-day basis to interact with legislators, to build relationships with them, to become policy experts, to become process experts, so that they understand how to I'm going to use the word manipulate, but I don't mean that in a negative fashion, manipulate the legislative process to achieve your policy goal. The other side of the house is you see Director of Political Operations. That is the side of the house that works to get favorable individuals elected. That is not a bad thing. Oftentimes people talk about electoral politics in a negative form or negative fashion. Electoral politics is not what people think it is. People have this perception of it's pay to play, it's access. Like people who engage in those kind of activities go to jail. It's super highly regulated. What electoral politics is recognizing the fact that it does take resources, which can be money, financial. It can be your communications network. It can be your brand and the platform that your brand brings you to amplify people who display a level of consistency with your policy perspective and view. Doesn't mean they're going to agree with you 100% of the time at all, but it's people that you know you can at least have a conversation with, because that is super important. It doesn't matter how persuasive you are as a lobbyist. If the individual that is sitting within the seat that votes is utterly opposed to your viewpoint and perspective, you're not going to have a chance to represent the constituency that your organization represents. And I use the term organization loosely. CMA is a very structured organization, but it could be a group of just volunteers who are interested in a subject matter or area. So when I say organization, don't necessarily think like a structured organization necessarily the way CMA is. I mean a collection of people who are band together either on a single policy issue or on a set of policy issues that they want to see change on, because that's why people engage the legislative process, is they want to see some sort of change happen. So the main point of this slide is there's two sides of the house, and both sides of the house interact with each other, have to communicate with each other, because if the politics side doesn't understand the policy side, then they don't know which candidates would be worthy of the organization's support. And if the legislative advocates aren't building relationship, understand the thought process and the decision-making process of elected officials, they can't be effective in their jobs either. So the point of this chart is that both sides of the house have to be represented, well-staffed, and equally respected in terms of the roles that they play. And then the unification of that under me just sort of talks about the need for them to work together and work hand in glove. Lobbying as a practice. What is lobbying? You know, oftentimes it's in the news or whatever, it's spoken ill of, and I understand why. But at the end of the day, it is about these 6 things, right? Influencing the introduction of legislation. Policy is made by the introduction of legislation and by the enactment of legislation. You can't get to enactment if you don't have introduction. And so who's doing the work to develop the ideas, to develop the support behind those ideas, and is willing to do, quite frankly, a lot of the footwork, literally walking up and down the hallways back when we were pre-pandemic, but now it's more walking up and down Zooms to explain why the statute needs to be changed, and or explain why the state should spend precious limited tax dollars to implement and or regulate an activity. So those 2 first bullets go hand in glove, right? Influencing the introduction of legislation and then shaping the language and the impact of legislation. Again, there's no reason to talk about amendments to a bill or the enactment of a bill if you can't even get the bill introduced. Third, building positive, trusting relationships with legislators. This is a business that is about your word. There is not a lot of individuals. There always are some that go around essentially spreading falsehoods. Because this business, if you get caught lying, it spreads around like wildfire. It's a very, very small community. And if you lose the trust of people, you've lost the currency that allows you to be effective. Positive relationships, again, doesn't mean that someone always agrees with you, but positive relationships mean, can I have a conversation with you? Do I understand your viewpoint and perspective? What are your limitations? What is your district makeup like? All those things establish the fact that you are interested in helping the member get to the place where they can be supportive of your issue. Because again, it is a relationship. It is a two-way street. Fourth, educating legislators, staff. Staff is critically important. I used to be, as mentioned in my bio, I used to be a legislative staffer for then the chair of the Appropriations Committee. I was also a member of the Budget Committee staff, where I oversaw the state budget for the California State Assembly as it related to public safety and transportation. And in every single instance, there's a staff recommendation. There's not a button or vote that is cast that isn't influenced by staff. And typically the people that are doing all of the background work and all of the briefings are staff. So a lot of times people make the mistake of trying to bypass staff just to get to the legislature and not recognizing that critical role that staff plays in shaping the contextual environment, the intellectual environment in which a legislator is operating in and making decisions in. And then other key stakeholders, and stakeholders vary by issue area. So if you're dealing with environmental laws or environmental things, you're gonna have a different set of stakeholders than if you're dealing with healthcare. And so, how can you work with those folks to solve problems, and recognizing that solving problems isn't necessarily getting your idea, but it's getting a workable solution. And that's very important, the distinction between those things. Influencing how legislators vote on legislation is exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes there's you see a problem, you come up with a solution to that problem, but that solution that you've developed isn't viable or completely implementable for one reason or another. You have to be focused on solving the problem and being open to and being flexible on what is the solution that gets to solving the problem. A lot of times where people become ineffective is they get locked into their solution as the only solution. Typically, those are not effective lobbyists. Effective lobbyists focus on how do I solve the problem and get there in a manner that allows for the legislature to get to a yes position versus giving them a reason to say no. And then lastly, activating grassroots networks. At the end of the day, every legislator is elected. They care what their district thinks about them. They care about what their constituencies voice their opinion on. Believe it or not, they don't get that much correspondence. But when they do get significant correspondence, it causes them to stand up, pay attention to that issue because they recognize that even if it's for a moment, their district is paying attention to that subject matter. And so it's important for them.
I have a question here, Janice, specifically around your first bullet point and your discussion around not only one solution is important. So is it the job of a government relations department of any entity or of any organization to actually offer text for bills for legislation?
Mhm.
Or is it just the responsibility to give support or, oppose existing?
Yeah, so it depends. So we will do both. For bills so there are different levels of engagement that people will get, organizations will enter into. You will hear terms such as CMA is sponsoring a bill. Typically, if you are sponsoring a bill, it is not only your idea, but you have drafted the language for that bill. Now, technically, Legislative Council drafts all bills for the California State Legislature, but you give them the language for Leg Council to put into Leg Council format. So yes, in many instances, for SB 250, for example, that Dr. Richard Pan, a state senator, chair of the Health Committee, is authoring. CMA is a sponsor of that legislation. We came up with the language. His staff tweaked it to a place that they were comfortable on, but we came up with the initial draft. Absolutely. When you are so yes, that happens. The other time that it happens is when you're seeking amendments to a bill. You will oftentimes draft the amendments that you're looking for to legislation and hand that over to the author's office, or if the author has a sponsor of the bill, to the author and the sponsor, because you're being very specific about the changes that you're seeking, and you don't want to leave it for misinterpretation, one, and then two, you actually want to make it as easy as possible. Believe it or not, by handing someone language, you get them past the conceptual stage, right? You get them if I hand you language and you're not interested in having a real discussion and back and forth about what my language does, you're going to tell me. You're like, look, there's no way I can get to yes on your language. Like, we're good. If you can kill my bill, you're just going to kill my bill. But if I get the language and I'm like, okay, so how would this work? I now know, as an entity that's trying to shape that language, that I actually have an engagement with the author and the sponsor, and I may get to a place that makes me comfortable. So absolutely, your part of the responsibility could include drafting of language. And it depends on the priority of the bill that you're dealing with. There are some bills that we just lend our name and support to because we think it's a good idea and don't get engaged at all in the drafting of it. So excellent question. Any other questions?
I haven't seen any come in the chat, but we'll definitely let you know if they do.
Perfect. So lobbying through organized medicine. As entering medical professionals, organized medicine is a way of getting involved. And the reason I want to promote organized medicine, not only because it's what CMA does, it gives structure to what you're doing, and it actually assists you in doing it. Some of the things that you do as organized medicine or an organized medicine entity is Leg Day. So you have lobby days in which that organization will come to the Capitol, meet with various legislators, and show a physical presence and a face. It allows you to, from a physician advocacy standpoint, create policies that allow you to know that the professional side of the organization is acting in your best interest. So for example, CMA has an entire policy compendium that is developed by its physician members. Our House of Delegates, which the med students have a section in, debate the top priority issues and develop policies based on those issues. At the Board of Trustees, people will submit resolutions to either update, add to, change, modify CMA's policies, and our med students have a voice in that as well. What that then translates to is my direction about how I view legislation. And so my physician members, my physician leaders can meet 4 times a year, Board of Directors, 1 time a year, House of Medicine, 1 time a year, our Council on Legislation. But I am getting input and direction through our policy compendium the entire way through. And it allows physicians to be effective as advocates, even though they're not necessarily walking with us on a day-to-day basis. 2, it also allows you to have individuals that are going to plug you into the process. So that hearing testimony component, we are consistently bringing physicians in to meet with members of the legislature. We're bringing them in to testify at hearings because the physician voice is the best voice to talk about policy changes that impact the healthcare delivery system. CMA is not the only type of organized medicine that there is. I think this is, yeah, perfect. There are other types of organized medicine entities that you can belong to. Your specialty societies is definitely one. We engage, there's 26 recognized specialties that CMA engages with in terms of its House of Medicine. And all of those will be particular. So our pediatricians really care about kids' issues. And they engage in kids' issues beyond the scope of quote unquote healthcare, and talk about social determinants and, you know, the availability of food and things of that nature. You have our neurosurgeons that will engage in conversations about, you know, sports was a real high topic a few years ago with concussions and all of those types of things. Your specialty society is a place where you can get engaged and really do a lot of good work. Family medicine is super engaged as well. But even specialties that you would think would not be highly engaged are. So for example, plastic surgery, highly engaged, anesthesiology, highly engaged, not only from a patient protection standpoint, but sometimes for other activities as well. Local medical societies, so county specific, Orange County, LA County Medical Society, they're engaged at the local level, trying to make things happen. And then issue specific associations, whether that be issues that are ethnic based, that can be an association that engages. Also issue based. So there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, disease specific associations. March of Dimes, for example, is a type of association where you have individuals who are looking at a specific disease, how that disease impacts the community, and they form associations and advocacy around that. Same thing with ethnic organizations, whether it's the challenges facing the API community comes to mind. They have specific challenges related to physicians that were practicing medicine internationally. How can they get their license here in California? Big issue for them, highly engaged. The Latino physicians, highly engaged. The National Medical Association, which is African-American association, highly engaged. And they usually tend to advocate on topics specific to those communities, organizations, or ethnicities. So I say all that to say CMA is a great option, but it's not the only option when you're thinking about medicine. You can look at it from a variety of angles. And the main point here is let your passion drive you, right? If you got into medicine because you really, really wanted to address a specific ailment, find the association that deals with that ailment, because it's a passion aspect. That's what will drive you. That's what will fuel you. That's what will make your advocacy really a part of what you do and enjoyable. If it's about a geographic area, find the local society that deals with that geographic area that's trying to improve it and bring resources to it. Again, I represent CMA. I think CMA is a fantastic organization. I encourage you to join CMA, especially because as a California med student, or any type of med student, it's free. But the real message here is your engagement should be driven by your passion, because you're going to be, you will continue to be incredibly busy. And when you think about that sort of time commitment, you want it to be something that you are passionate about. So that's that. I want to highlight NEPO, our network of ethnic physicians. It's something that our foundation, Physicians for a Healthy California, helps organize around. A lot of times individuals don't know that there are different ethnic-based organizations out there. And so we try to make sure that we promote them, because as a unit, they are really about how do we promote and care for the diversity of the patients in California, and account for the diversity that needs to happen within the workforce as well. So it's not just about the patient, but how do you impact medicine so that it accurately reflects California. So that leads me to you're engaged, you figured out what your passions are. How do you get legislators to, how do you get legislators to engage you? How do you get legislators to do what you want? This is not like Frank Underwood. What is that show? I'm now blanking on it. House of Cards, right? It's well, let me say it this way. I have never worked in DC, so maybe DC is. Sacramento is not like House of Cards. There's nobody, throwing people in front of buses and all of that kind of stuff. What influences legislators? One, the vast majority of them have come here because they want to do good. That is incredibly important to operate from. People are incredibly jaded nowadays, and doubt that the reason people get into public service, for the vast majority of them, is because there was a problem that they wanted to solve at some level. And then they just realized, their ability to solve problems was greater if they were in elected office. No one wants to subject themselves to this scrutiny unless they're trying to do good stuff. So first and foremost, they're trying to do good. Now, the question becomes is, how do you define what good is? Because good is a subjective term, okay? What is good to you may not be good to someone else. So what influences the legislator? A piece of legislation that's good public policy. Typically, that means aligns with their viewpoint and perspective of public policy. And that goes back to why there are two sides of the House, right? You have the electoral side, and then you have the lobbyist traditional side. And making sure that you're engaging individuals that have your public policy perspective is step one. Because again, good is a subjective term. Let's just play this out just for the sake of it, right? If you are and I'm just going to pick on them because it's easy. If you are a gas company, if you're Chevron, electric vehicles aren't good. If you are a electricity company, like, well, we shouldn't use PG&E. Well, we're Southern California Edison. They're less terrible. Electric vehicles are good, right? You're going to use more electricity, right? I didn't even get to like environmentalists and all those other sort of stakeholders. If you just looked at it from you're a supplier of electricity versus you're a supplier of oil, is an electric vehicle good or bad, right? So again, public good is a subjective term. So I know I've beaten that horse, so I'll move on. So first of all, is it a good piece of public policy? Second, how does it impact my district? And what does it mean to the constituencies, the core constituencies of my district, right? And each district is going to have different core constituencies. And if you're in a district that has, and just to bring it into to medicine, if you're a district that has no hospitals in it, you may not care what impacts the hospitals, right? Because your district doesn't have a hospital in it. If you are a rural district that is trying to recruit physicians to that district, right? That's your perspective on legislation. Is this going to attract physicians to come to my rural remote district, or is it going to make it even a further hindrance to come to my rural and remote district? So what does it mean to my district, and what does it mean to my key constituencies that I value, that I look to, quite frankly, for reelection? Again, this means doing your homework on the individual, doing your homework on the place that they represent. This is not about just the fact of, we're getting all the way to the end before we talk about money. Like the first two things are do your homework. Make sure you know what their policy perspective is. Make sure you know what works for them in their districts so that you understand how to pitch something, how to talk about something. Third, who supports the legislation and who opposes the legislation, right? Everybody, treats the, word special interest groups as bad. CMA is a special interest group. I am especially interested in how physicians view changes in the law. And those supporters have resources to shape the narrative of how a bill is perceived by newspapers, by other news outlets, direct communications, whether it's social media, whether it's mail to key voters, because typically whenever you do stuff like that, you're going to talk to voters. So who is supporting and who is opposing matters from that political sense. It also matters from a policy sense because it gives validation and comfort that you have a lot of bills in front of you. They don't have an opportunity to read every line of a bill, but they know if the supporters are aligned with their public policy view, then the bill more likely than not is pretty good. It's going to be fine. So how does that sort of play out? Why does that matter? In any given calendar year, there's 4,000 bills that are introduced in the legislative process. Okay, let me say that again. There's 4,000 bills that are getting introduced in the legislative process. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're one individual, there's no way you're reading all 4,000 bills. You are going to rely on your staff first and foremost, but you're also going to rely on some key indicators that tell you a bill is okay. So if you are really concerned about justice, equality, disparities, then you'll look for organizations that care about those entities as well. Where is Equality California on something? Where is CPIN? Oh my gosh, what are they called? Western Center on Law and Poverty, right? Entities that have committed themselves to the issue of justice and equality. If you care about delivery of healthcare, you're going to want to know where CMA is, right? What are the doctors saying about this bill? And so the supporters not only tell you politics-wise, how is this issue going to line up? Who is this important to? How are people engaged? But it also tells you from a policy standpoint, how does this line up with my view? Again, if you think about the first three components of this, all of this is doing your homework, making sure you understand your research. So who are you talking to and what is their lens? What is the district that they represent and who are the loudest voices in that district? And then how do those voices line up with the people that are supporting or opposing your effort? And then lastly, you get to money. Lastly, you get to that because typically political activity or fundraising is about supporting people that have been supportive of you. That's why sort of some of the notions that people have about is sort of like it's pay to play. Like you have campaign limits, right? So in a direct contribution, I can only give an elected official $4,800 each election. That's not a lot of money. So people, I mean, yes, people get motivated by that because campaigns are incredibly expensive. We just ran a race for the replacement of Dr. Shirley Weber, and her daughter, Dr. Akilah Weber, replaced her in San Diego. that was over $1 million spent in that race. So yes, it takes resources in order to achieve that, but it's not the primary motivator that is getting folks to vote and act in certain ways in terms of those issues. So I see something in the chat.
I was just giving our students a little commentary and connecting some other ideas that we've discussed in the course and connecting them to your talk right now.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Okay, so with that though, normally in the legislative process, you don't have a lot of time. You're going to do a lot of work talking to staff, but you get in with a member and you can get like a 15-minute meeting. Usually the first few minutes of that 15-minute meeting are a lot of pleasantries and establishing a rapport. And then you got, you know, a few minutes to deliver your message and deliver it effectively. That's a good day. Sometimes, and this has happened to me pre-COVID, you know, Monday through Thursday, sometimes you literally have an elevator ride to convince a legislator why they should vote yes or no on an issue. And that's the notion of an elevator pitch. How do you quickly and effectively communicate what you are about and why you should, why someone should act in a manner that you want them to do. So what is an elevator pitch? Well, first of all, let me say too, the reason that I want you to focus on being able to deliver an elevator pitch is because a longer meeting is just an expansion of your elevator pitch, right? If you can deliver something concisely, everything else are just details that further prove the point that you're making. Does that make sense? So, and there will be an example of it, but your elevator pitch is your outline for a longer conversation. So if you only get an elevator ride with a member, you can deliver your message with an elevator ride. If you get the pleasure of having dinner and it's multiple hours with a member, you can expand out your material, add anecdotes, add stories, all of those things, but they are all relating back to your main core message and your core point. So what are the elements of an elevator pitch that are successful? You want to introduce yourself, the topic, the idea, first and foremost. You want to provide some background information. Again, part of the reason you're providing background information is to establish your expertise or establish your passion. Like, why are you here? Third, you want to explain sort of the context of what problem you're trying to solve, or situation that you're trying to improve. 4, you want to connect the dots, like why does that problem matter to you? And then 5, you want to make the ask. You want to make sure that you ask them to do something, to take action on the issue that you're moving into. And then 6, you want to have a closing that is respectful, that leads you to a place where that you can have follow-up conversations. What I want to do is show you an elevator pitch. I just pulled this off of YouTube. I think this woman does a fantastic job. I'm going to play you a clip, the end clip of her entire presentation about how to create an elevator pitch. You can look it up on YouTube as well at the Intern Queen. But after this, we're going to put you in breakout rooms and we want you to try it. We're not going to give you a subject, or we could give you, sorry, it's not about the subject. So you can make up your elevator pitch about anything that you want. If you're having a problem thinking about coming up with a subject, I want you to give me an elevator pitch on which is the best flavor of ice cream and why I should try it. again, it isn't about the content. It's about having the skill, because if you can do it on what is your favorite flavor of ice cream and why I should try it, you'll be able to do it on a significant policy issue that is actually meaningful versus something as I think whimsical as the flavor of ice cream. So I want to play this clip for you so that you can see a pitch in action. I want to then answer any questions about sort of structure. And then we want to put you in some breakout rooms. I want everyone to do, take 40 seconds, think about what you want to do as your elevator pitch. I want each person to do it. And then I want someone to be a brave enough soul from each room to volunteer to do it in front of the whole group, so that we can sort of talk it through with some real live examples of what's good, what needs to be improved upon, so that we have some tangible feedback there. So with that, I'm going to hit play and I'm going to see if this works. And if not, we will try to problem solve. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Lauren Berger. So nice to meet you. I graduated from the University of Central Florida. That's in Orlando. And I was actually a PR major. I know all about your PR company and I am just fascinated by it. I've read all about you. I'd actually love to intern for you this summer. I've had a lot of other internships and I wanted to ask who I could contact to potentially apply for an internship with your company. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It was so great meeting you. I'm going to email you tonight and I definitely want to stay in touch. Thank you.
Okay. That's what we're talking about. So I know people don't like public speaking, but it's 30 seconds. It's really concise. I'm going to go back to the components. She hit all 6 of those, right? She gave some background. She made the connection that she was looking to do intern. She studied PR. She's looking to be a PR intern. She studied PR, right? Established some credibility, talked about sort of where she was, and now she's trying to make that connection. She made the ask. The ask was specific. Who can I contact about becoming an intern? And then the closing, was I'm going to follow up with you so that we have the continued dialogue. Any questions about the structure of an elevator pitch?
So is it meant to be no longer than 30 seconds?
Yes, for the purpose of this exercise, it's 30 seconds. I mean, we're not going to be hardcore timing you, but yes, it's the point of this is to be fast, 30 seconds. And notice she didn't talk. I mean, she was a little hurried, but she wasn't speeding through. So 30 seconds is actually longer than you think it is. And literally, you can do a lot in a 30-second elevator ride.
And I just want to highlight that having just 30 seconds is not unrealistic. So I want this to be a microcosm, if you will, for a larger opportunity for you all. We're going to send you into breakout rooms. And just to be clear, you'll have about 15 minutes to put together a 30-second pitch. It can be on any topic of your choosing. And if you're struggling on what topic to choose, just pick your favorite ice cream flavor and what that legislator should know about that ice cream flavor and why they should try to me.
It should be, essentially, it's what is your ice cream flavor and why it should be the state's, like the ice cream flavor for the state of California. If you're having a problem, right? Keep it light. It's supposed to be fun, right?
Exactly. All right. Are you ready to send them into breakouts then, Janus?
Yeah, if there are no other questions, we'll see you.
Okay.
All right.
And then Reese, feel free to join anyone that you like. I just can't assign you as a host.
Does that make sense? So, okay. I'm not from Sacramento originally, right? But that doesn't stop me from, okay. So we were having this conversation. I was talking to John Perez, who is now the chair of the UC Regents, but he started, and he was Speaker of the House, Speaker of the State Assembly. And he started in, started politics in sort of student government. And he would organize college students, organize them to vote, and so on and so forth. And I started talking about that because I was involved in student government. And I was like, we used to have these debates back and forth about whether or not a college student should re-register at the college they're from or back at home. And he was just like adamant, like, you stay registered at home because that's where your vote matters. The college stuff is different. He's like, if I go to college somewhere, I'm from that place. I could say I go to college at this place. And if I want to talk to someone about my experience in that geographic area, I would talk about it from my experience as a college student from that place. So it was about, I bring that story up because it's not about what you can't connect to, it's about what you can connect to, right? So if you are a transplant to a new geographic area, but you're talking to someone about an issue, well, it's because that issue exists in that geographic area, right? And so why do you care about that issue? And regardless of what it is, you could say, I've had people talk about, look, I care about poverty because I grew up in poverty. I care about the ocean because I grew up next to the ocean, and water quality was important to me because growing up, I saw blah happen, and I've spent my rest of my life trying to protect that. You connect to the aspect that you can, and you forget about the rest, because genuine connectivity is what you're striving for, not perfect connectivity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It totally does. And I did restart the recording, so I just want to make sure that people understood the question. The question was initially just, how can you still connect with a legislator if you're not necessarily from their district or are a voting constituent, et cetera, and how can you still develop connection? And I think that was a really perfect answer. Yeah. So I want to open the floor if anyone else does have questions for Janus. We're coming up on, about time now, but if people had other questions that they wanted to ask or other things that they're curious about, by all means. Regardless, our feedback link is live, so we still do want your feedback on this session. So by all means, fill that out for us. And then I actually did have another question.
Yeah.
How or what is coming up in terms of immediate opportunities for engagement for us as medical students, as trainees, to support your lobbying agenda?
Yeah, a lot of from CMA's perspective, one, you just you can go to cmadocs.org, go to our Grassroots Action Center. You'll see different categories of activities to get engaged in. A lot of what we're doing right now is focused on the budget. And what we're focusing on the budget is really a couple of things, but primarily, how do we get physicians to go to underserved areas and medically under-resourced areas? And one of the ways that we do that is by providing loan repayment assistance to physicians that agree to serve a significant population of Medi-Cal, so about 20% of your patient population would be Medi-Cal, in an underserved area. If you do that for 5 years, the program pays off. I think it's like $300,000 worth of debt. And so we're fighting at the state budget level to get those resources. And part of the reason why we're fighting for those resources is the pandemic has exposed something that we've known for a while, right? That the state does have a maldistribution of physicians, not only a shortage, but a maldistribution of physicians. And some of those communities don't have healthcare infrastructure. And so how do you start moving in healthcare infrastructure? one of the ways you can do that is get individuals early on in their medical careers to move to those areas in exchange for debt relief. The second component of what we're asking for is as we move into childhood rollout of the COVID-19 vaccination program, we know that we're going to need community providers, right? You're going to have a lot of parents that are going to have a lot of reasonable questions about the COVID-19 vaccine from the various companies and the impact that it will have on their kids, right? That's very difficult to do in a mass vaccination setting, right? It's very difficult to say that you're going to take a bunch of kids and vaccinate them at Dodger Stadium and think that some parents are going to feel comfortable asking the questions they need to ask. Where they do feel comfortable is with their community providers. And so how do we make sure that community providers are onboarded and resourced so that they not only are able to provide the first shot and the second shot, there's a notion now that you may need a booster shot or a third shot, and that you're going to continue to have sort of transformation of COVID into sort of a seasonal illness, hopefully, where you'll have sort of people into sort of a ritual like a flu shot, right, in terms of their vaccinations. And so for us, it's about, okay, how do we now incentivize people to go into those communities? We know that supplemental, through our efforts in Prop 56, which was a tobacco tax that provided supplemental payments, we know that supplemental payments work. And so we're working and pushing for substantial amount of resources to create supplemental payments for people who are willing to move their practices into areas that don't have enough physician and medical infrastructure so that they can serve those communities. And again, it's a recognition of the fact that at a base level, what you are provided for Medi-Cal just doesn't allow for doors to stay open. And so you have a lot of people that are making sort of those financial decisions about the ability to serve those patients on a consistent basis. And so how can we be targeted? So it's not just all of Medi-Cal, it's really Medi-Cal in those places that don't have infrastructure, and how do we target that those investments to those areas. So those are two things that we'll be doing in the next few days. And I shouldn't say next few days, next few weeks. The May revision will be coming out. And so we'll go into this sprint in the budget, but we'll be looking for resources to help with debt relief for people that are willing to serve Medi-Cal patients in underserved areas. And then how do we build infrastructure where COVID is really identified there's a lack thereof. So those are two
I feel
efforts.
like you're talking at me because that is all the things that are relevant to me for sure. Glad to know the California Medical Association is representing my interests. I want to thank you for being with us tonight, Janus. You provided a really good tag along, because immediately before your session, we had a session uniquely on organized medicine and welcomed leaders who have served in various organizations. So this was like the perfect close to the day. So I want to thank you for being with us, and I hope you'll continue to join us in the future.
My pleasure.